Yes. Good morning, everyone. My name is Michael Wall. I'm from the Center for Youth Voice at the YMCA. I'm the one who keeps sending you emails. So it's great to have you here, both in person or online. We've got about 150 people, which is fabulous, from cities and townships and counties all over the state of Minnesota. And this is hopefully just a beginning for us. This is meant to be an ongoing resource networking and resource sharing opportunity for you. So at any point, whether during the session or especially after, we hope to be able to continue to share, to answer questions, and to give you the resources you need to create a program of recruitment and the successful utilization of student election judges. You may have been aware that we did this for the first time, both the Center for Youth, well, all of the Center for Youth Voice, Minneapolis Elections, and the League of Minnesota Cities in 2000 with the pandemic. So we put it off, but we are back. And we're glad you are here with us today. I'm gonna turn this over to Amy Anderson. The agenda is here. We're gonna begin with Amy with a welcome and some student testimonials talking about their experience. And then we will talk about a 2018-19 survey on high school student election judges, the programs, and you'll see a lot more detail there. And then we'll come back to me and I will walk you through an online resource that will continue to grow and deepen. We'll take a little break and then we'll have a panel of some folks who have been involved already and share some stories and experiences on their student election judge work. And then we will have some breakout time at the end for you to connect with folks, but I will be sending the list of attendees out to everybody afterwards, along with the link to this recording, and that'll give you the opportunity to continue to make connections and work with folks. Amy Anderson.
Thank you, and thank you all so much for coming today, those of you who are here in person with us, and those online. As Michael said, my name is Amy Anderson. I'm the Executive Director of the YMCA Center for Youth Voice. I'm joined today by Michael, who works as the Outreach Manager at the Center for Youth Voice, Karen Scheel, who works as the Youth Engagement Coordinator for the Minneapolis Elections and Voter Services, and then Amber Eisenstein, who's over there, who's been working with Michael and Karen and I to help. She's the Research Manager here at the League to work on pulling this together. I should also mention Alex and Ted from the League are joining us here and are helping to make this, pulling this whole thing together, which is just an amazing achievement of hybrid meeting magic. So, as Michael mentioned, this is the second time that we have gathered to talk about student election judges or election judge trainees, whichever you call them. Who of you here today, and you can indicate either on the screen or by raise of hands, attended the meeting here in the fall of 2019? The room looks different, but boy, we really didn't know it was coming when we were sitting here that fall, did we?
So this room was on the other side of the building.
This room was on the other side of the building.
Yes.
And the pandemic was looming. So there was just all kinds of changes coming to our lives that we didn't know. The goal of that session, which is the goal of the same goal of the session today, is really to learn from one another and make connections between us that are going to be mutually beneficial. At the Center for Youth Voice, we are continually looking for ways to help young people learn about civics by doing civics, whether that's through youth in government, Model United Nations, Youth Day at the Capitol, students voting, or serving as an election judge. Learning about your successes as well as your challenges and needs, are going to make it easier for us to connect young people with you. Our hope is that hearing anecdotes and examples of how other election offices around the state are currently working with young people will inspire you to continue to grow opportunities for young people to join your teams and make it easier to make that relationship work. Research shows us that low rates of youth voting and civic engagement indicate not general apathy, but a lack of knowledge about voting elections and a lack of normalization about voting in their community. As election judges, students learn to navigate the internal workings of our election and government systems, often before they're old enough to vote. While serving in this role, young people can see the impact they have and the importance and power of their own vote through the votes of others. So anyone who's heard me talk about the Student Election Judge Network, which is the name that we've called the collective gathering of what we're doing here today with all of us in the room, has probably heard me refer to it as a triple or quadruple threat. Go to the next slide. Number one, students benefit by gaining financially. They get paid to do this, and learning about, as I mentioned, the back end of elections and what happens. Bonus expert, they also get their parents and teachers who think that what they're doing is fabulous, which is just a little bit of an extra plus on that side. Election offices benefit, and I think most of you know that, but we think that by expanding your pool of poll workers, as we saw in 2020 when that need arose, and it was very challenging to get our traditional group of poll workers to come in during the pandemic. So growing that, and growing the bench, as we like to say, is an important thing we think. Voters benefit. One of the things we know about young people voting for the first time is that they walk into an election polling place sometimes and don't see themselves there. So having young people at the polls makes it more welcoming to expand the young people who are coming in to vote for the first or second or early time. And democracy benefits, because we think that serving as an election judge helps to sort of increase the sense that we are all in this together and that we understand the security and the safety and the importance of our democratic processes. So win-win-win is what I sort of say, and I think many of us in the room will agree. Who wouldn't want to be part of all that effort with all those great outcomes? Michael read through the agenda, so I'm going to skip over that and just talk about the notion that this really is about connecting with each other with our various ways that we can support over time to make this more successful for you. That's our goal. The time at the end of the workshop today to connect with one another, ask questions, tee up future conversations, we think is probably just about as important of time as anything in this. Our hope coming out of today is that you will be inspired, as I said, to increase your efforts to engage young people in election judges and recognize that you have connections and resources in the folks around the table to make that process easier than it's ever been. So now I'm going to turn it over to some young people who have served as election judges. One is here with us in person, the rest are online. I'd like to introduce Armida Dash Galdams, Ella Hannigan, Irene Howard, Charlie Schmidt, and Ridwan Mohammed. And the goal here, we've just asked them to share a little bit about what drew them to this experience, what they learned from the experience, and what they took away from the experience. We'll just have a time for them to speak, and then you can ask questions as well.
Want to start with anyone in particular? I see Charlie.
Charlie, is Charlie raising his hand? He's out. No, he said no.
I'll go first. That's okay.
Okay,
Great.
thanks, Charlie.
Yeah, all good. Sorry, we're just switching our audio because Drew, Ella, and I are all in the same room right now. But anyways, hi, my name is Charlie Schmidt. I served as a student election judge for the first time last year. I'm also on the Minnesota Youth Council, and I do a lot of work with youth and government and that stuff. But I decided to be a student election judge last year, really because my mom and Drew, who's sitting over there, talked to me about it, and were like sharing how they thought it could be like something beneficial. In Minneapolis, we're getting paid like $17.15 an hour, I think. So it's also just like a good way to like make money. And so I decided to just sign up one day, and I was like, oh, it'll be like a fun little thing. And I think it was a really beneficial experience because I think as a student election judge, you get a firsthand view on elections and what actually happens in elections, and you're physically viewing the voting process, which I think is something that youth don't have a lot of access to. And I think it's, again, really important, specifically right now, because youth are getting more expansions in their rights. For example, last year, the Democracy for the People Act was passed, and students can now, or 16 and 17-year-old students can now pre-register to vote. So not only can those 16 and 17-year-olds serve as student election judges, but they can also pre-register to vote. And I think those two really build on one another. And so I think it's a really valuable experience to gain, to see like, okay, like this is how voting works. Like this is what's happening. And then I can also go and pre-register the same day and feel like I'm part of the process. And I think that a lot of students would agree on that. I'd also say like getting paid is obviously a really good benefit. Like I know that I very much appreciated when that paycheck came in, because I did work like 12 hours or something that day. But I also think it's beneficial because there are students that are, I can't miss school because election day is obviously a school day. And what then is supplemented without, if you're not a student election judges, a lot of schools have begun running, I think through the YMCA or in works with the YMCA youth, is students voting in schools. So they have like mock elections in school. We have mock election judges. So like on student council, people are asking me to sign up to be a mock election judge. And I was like, sorry, I got to go be a real election judge. So, so I think we've done a really good job at making sure youth are like constantly being reminded about voting and constantly have it in their sphere. But I think being a student election judge is really a unique experience that just adds a level of depth to understanding voting and to learning about voting that the other experiences can't really provide. And so that's why I decided to be a student election judge. And that's why I'm going to continue to be a student election judge this year. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Charlie. Ella, do you want to go next?
Yeah. Hi, my name is Ella Hennigan. I was an election judge in the primary last year and the general election. I first heard about the opportunity to work in a polling place, I think my sophomore year of high school, when I heard other students talk about it. And I thought it seemed like a cool thing because I've always kind of had like an interest in politics and elections. And then later on, after like talking with my parents and kind of like remembering this, like early last summer, I signed up to be an election judge in the primary because I thought it seemed like a cool thing to do and a nice way to like get paid and like kind of make an impact on my community. And I would say that I gained a lot from the experience of being an election judge. I think I learned a lot more about how elections worked and became more excited about like getting to vote when I'm old enough. I was a bit nervous when I like on my first day because I thought that I would like be kind of out of place with, because a lot of the other judges are like adults and some of them have been doing it for like a really long time. And I thought that like as a student who had never worked an election before, I like would be kind of out of place and wouldn't really know what was going on. But I had like a really positive experience with the other judges in my precinct. We kind of like bonded as a group, and I kind of like left that day feeling like I was kind of like a part of a community and kind of made this connection with people. And I like kind of left like excited for the next election and wanting to work again. And I just like had a really good experience. And I think it kind of made me more interested in doing stuff related to this. I started participating more in Model UN and youth in government. And I've been like working with Karen a bit on like an election ambassador internship. And I think that this experience kind of like inspired me to try to like reach out more and join more stuff. And just overall kind of made me more interested in elections.
Wonderful. Thank you. Drew, I see you. Thanks for coming in. On the screen, it says Irene Howard, but Irene was not able to make it. And Drew, thank you for stepping up.
Yes, so I'm here for Irene today. I learned about election judging originally from Ella. So all three of us in this room, we learned about it from each other. And I think that's kind of the theme with student election judging. It's like you have one friend doing it and everyone's like, oh, like that actually does sound like a really good opportunity. And for high schoolers, it really is exciting having like one day, I mean, off of school to go like work in the polls, like be right in the center of elections. And signing up for it, it's just kind of like, oh, just that sounds fun. It like wasn't like super deep, but it's really cool, like seeing inside that Democratic Center, like when we're getting trained and all this stuff, like we're learning what it's like to like actually like run the polls, run those tablets, run like all that stuff. And then the day of, I really liked it. It's really fun. I worked right in my neighborhood and it was really fun seeing like all my neighbors come in, like, you know, like seniors from my school come in and vote. So it was really cool, like kind of seeing another side of your community, seeing like kind of everyone together there at some point that day. And of course, like the pay too, it's just like I get a day off of school and I don't know how much I made, like $200. And and like learning about what it's like to be right there. And it's like, as telling someone before, like before someone asked me, it's like, can I register day of to vote? I'd be like, I don't know, like I'm 16, I'm 17, whatever. And because you're there, because you're whatever, you like now I can answer questions like that, being like, yes, you can, you just have to bring this and this and this. Yeah. And leaving that day was super exciting. And we've stayed attached to Karen, like through other opportunities like this, like because we really felt involved in the election judging process. And we want to be as involved as we can with youth voting. And, you know, like I think we're all involved with the Y2, like the Center of Youth Voice and all that stuff too, because we are very attached to the idea of voting and students getting as involved as they can.
Thank you, Drew. Really appreciate that. We're going to turn to Araminta. You don't have an image yet, but it is your turn.
All right. I'm Araminta Doshko-Lamas. I'm a senior. And I learned about being an election judge from my school, from one of my teachers. And me and a bunch of my friends, kind of like has been said, all decided to sign up together. And I didn't end up working with them on that day, but it was a cool experience to have as kind of a friend group and be able to encourage other people at my school to be election judges. And I was pretty nervous, but the experience was really good. And I got to meet a lot of different people who'd been election judges for years, and they shared kind of why it was important and how, you know, they helped me if I was ever confused. And so that was a really good experience to be able to see people who had been doing it for years and years, and how committed they were to making sure that people could vote. And yeah, it was a really good experience. And I think that especially because I couldn't vote, I wasn't old enough to vote, being able to be involved in the voting process and see how the process worked was just a really unique experience. And describing that to, you know, my friends and family and getting them, that really got them excited about voting. And, you know, my peers who weren't old enough to vote yet were me talking about it, you know, they were excited about voting or being an election judge. And so, yeah, it was a really cool experience. And yeah.
Thank you. And our final student election judge sharing before we see if there are any questions for this group is here in the room. Ridwan.
Hi everyone, my name is Ridwan Mohammed. I currently attend the University of Minnesota. I have been involved in election since I was 16. I first got involved with elections because of my teacher as well, my IB politics teacher. She wanted us to do this for an extra credit assignment, and honestly, I wanted to do it my sophomore year, but I wasn't like old enough to do it. So when she told us like incentivize it that way, and there was like money involved, I was like, you know what, it'd be fun. Me and my friends, just like all of you all, ended up signing up for it and taking advantage of this like opportunity. We learned so much from it, and then we were able to like apply it to what we were learning in class, because at the time we were also talking about like what it means to take the civics test. It was like the time that we were learning all about that, and being an immigrant, it was kind of fulfilling to kind of see how that process happens and how people of my origin can kind of like be involved in this. When I did it, it felt very empowering, and what I learned from it was a lot. And then Karen, big shout out to her, made this process really easy, and she made it simple, and I wasn't like really like too nervous about it. I think it was more like understanding how to do this, how the importance of it. And then I think as I went on and I gained, like I learned to love the work, and now I'm here working with them again. But essentially, like I wanted to go to school for pre-law, and so this kind of like helped me direct me in this in this like path that I'm on right now. So I don't know, and it's like a long running thing that's been going on. It's been fulfilling, and I'm here now. Yeah, so it's about me.
At this point, we have a few minutes left that we'd like to open it up if there's any questions of the young people that anybody has, either online or in the room. I'm sure they are more than willing to share and answer if there's anything that is you'd like to ask.
You can throw it in the chat. You can raise your hand.
Amber.
How best do we get young people's attention? You know, we have lots of benefits. You guys have all seemed to have had a very positive experience, but how do we get their attention enough just to even pay attention to, you know, this opportunity?
For me, I think what actually like got my attention, the whole thing was, I think at the time there was a lot of like civic like just unrest that was going on, like a lot of civil unrest that was going on, and I thought being a part of this would just kind of like help me learn how to better help my people and just like translate what I'm learning to them better. So I think it's how do you make it so that people feel it's important, and just like making them understand what part they play right now as young people. That's honestly the best way that you could have got my attention, I think.
Anybody else online like to add to that? How did you learn about this experience, and what kinds of things would capture your attention? Is it the chance to make some money? Is it the chance to be part of democracy? What message would compel you to want to explore more?
I'd say for me, what I think is like really good at like convincing kids to do this is just like let them understand how much they're actually participating directly in democracy. Personally, I'm very involved. Like I went and I testified in front of Congress earlier this year on more protections for election judges, and provided a student election judge like viewpoint on how we should be protecting election judges, just like after like 2020 and stuff with other elections. But I think the best way to get students engaged is really just to be like shoving it in their face, to be completely honest. Like some students like just don't care about voting, and you're not going to like convince them to care about voting. But I think what really is like can draw on those people is, one, like you do get paid like a good amount of money to work as an election judge, and you get to miss a day of school. And so I think that's compelling, but it's also like this is like a very much a learning opportunity. Like being an election judge is a learning environment. Like you are learning how democracy works. There is no way a social studies class could teach you what you learn as an election judge. And I think it's just like such a valuable experience that it's not like, I don't know if it's like not well advertised as such, but it's like my principal has emailed, I think, everyone in the school, like, hey, if you want to be a student election judge, here's the sign up link. And so I think that's like really all you can do. But I think Minneapolis has done a great job with the student election judge network. I know a lot of kids who like being student election judges. And I really just think like directly like reaching out via email is like the best way, and shoving in their face with like, oh, we have voting in your school on election day. Oh, we have like mock election judges in your school. Oh, we have pre-registration. Oh, like the Secretary of State's coming to your school to talk about pre-registration, like things like that. Just like basically like keeping a constant, like constantly pushing for more voting access, more voting for students, so they can understand like, hey, like what I have to say and what I have to do is actually important, I think is the way to get them best engaged.
Thank you, Charlie.
I agree.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I also think that when it's other young people, like I think that people are more high schoolers are more likely to listen to like their friends. So I think I found that like when I talk to other like my friends or other high schoolers, they often listen and think it's, you know, they get interested in doing it. Whereas I think sometimes when it's just, you know, like a teacher sending out like an email or just an email, sometimes people ignore it. Yeah. So I
And
think,
let me follow up. Does that, does it work better to hear from a young person who you may not be friends with more than that teacher announcement or email from the school?
I think so. Yeah. At least in my experience, I think, especially hearing about the experience from somebody who's done it. Yeah.
Fabulous. A couple of questions in the chat. One, you guys answered about the best way to reach out. I think Charlie has said barrage. And the type of materials that are available to help, we're going to get into that in a little while when we talk about our toolkit, which is ever evolving and enriching. But we'll do a walkthrough as to what's available there. But I would say that involving the teens themselves in developing materials in your area for your city, your township, your county is a great way to go. Because those tastes and those experiences and even the methods of communication are constantly evolving as well. I would love to continue with questions, but we have a lot more for you. So we are going to begin to talk about a survey that was done. I'm clicking and sharing and talking at the same time. That was done of election programs. And no, I'm going to turn it over to Karen
And Ridwan.
and Ridwan. Yep. Wonderful.
So back in 2019, we did a survey after talking with folks from the League of Minnesota Cities and the YMCA about, you know, how many jurisdictions in Minnesota are using young people as election judges in the polling place. How extensive is this? You know, we had some knowledge about places that we knew in the Twin Cities, but we wanted to really look and see, are other jurisdictions doing this? Are they interested? And so I'm going to, again, share some of those results from that survey that we did then. And this is kind of a lead up and a pitch to you all to participate in a new survey coming up this year, where we're going to be asking some of the same questions, because we know things have changed since the pandemic. And we know that there's been a strong interest in getting more young people involved in elections. But I wanted to share with you what we've done in the past and use this to tee up what we hope to do in the future with you. So what we did was conducted research to 176 jurisdictions in Minnesota, cities and counties, all of the cities and counties with populations of at least 10,000. We did our initial outreach by email and then followed up by phone with those that we didn't hear back from. We had a total of 107 of those surveys completed. And I'm just going to highlight some of the key findings there. You know, the big question was, how common are student election judge programs? And it looks like Ridwan has something to say about this.
So as you can see, there is a slight majority of jurisdictions that work with high school students. Many of those students who do not work, many of these students who do not work counties, we do not hire election judges. So you can see right there in the sections.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we found that there's, although some counties do, like Ramsey, hire election judges, many other counties didn't. So I think this is one question we're going to look at a little bit differently on the upcoming survey to just really have a sense of that spread. And, you know, we've been talking a lot this morning about how student election judges are recruited. And we found that most jurisdictions that worked with high school students had an informal relationships with one of the schools. Those school partnerships were really important to the elections offices. Other ways that they reached young people were youth groups like the Y programs or some after school programs, Boy Scouts. And other jurisdictions said that they didn't really do recruitment of them, but students reached out to them, whether they heard about it through a parent or a friend. The students were the ones directly doing the outreach to the jurisdiction. And thinking about how those jurisdictions work with student judges. You know, in terms of training, most at this point in time trained all of their election judges in person together. Some offered specific training only for the high school students, where they would go into the schools and do the trainings, or have classes specifically for the student election judges, because they felt they needed to have some broader information on elections. And many people feel that young people have more of a chance to ask the questions that they have more freely if they're in an audience with other young people rather than mixed in with adults. So there's been some differences there. And I know that since this time, a lot of jurisdictions have gone to online training. So this is one thing we think we'll see some differences on. Although state law allows jurisdictions to pay trainee election judges less than adult judges, most jurisdictions really seem to pay them the same rate for doing the same work.
For this portion, as you can see, election offices are more happy with their student election judges, and survey reports from their students show that they are likewise happy with the experience.
And, you know, thinking about this, one of the reasons that we're doing this and we want to do another survey is to really think about what are the benefits and the challenges for elections offices when they work with students. You know, and we think that repeating this survey, we can get at some of those more specific challenges. We know that all jurisdictions aren't the same, that there are differences in the geography, in the population, in party balance within those jurisdictions. So really helping us get at some of those questions so we can help think about those challenges and work our way through them. One of the things that we asked in the last survey, next slide, is like, what kinds of tools do you need for working with students? And we saw that there was a broad interest in a really good variety of tools, things that will help provide assistance in connecting with the schools in the area. You know, what are the best practices for working with youth? We're used to working with adults, we're used to supervising adults, but what is it that we need to know if we're working with young people? How are they different? What do we need to do different? And kind of looking at what those resources look like. Are they online? Are they recruitment tools? What kinds of things? And that's how we based things for the first toolkit. And Michael will be talking about that in a few minutes here. But we'll be asking some of these kinds of questions again. And, you know, I think you can slip to the next one. This findings on high school students as poll workers. One of the things that we did in following 2020. We had another intern working for us that summer. Evelyn Olson had been a student election judge with us and was working with us over the summer and decided that one of the things she was really interested in looking at was what are the benefits when high school students serve as poll workers. And she came up with a really unique study that she was able to compare the voting registration rates of students who served as election judges in Minneapolis with the voting registration and voting rates of the same age cohort who did not serve as election judges statewide. And what she found were three things: that it really benefits students because it increases their voter registration rates and increases their voting rates. You know, where about 50% of 18-year-olds vote in Minnesota, about 66% of the student election judges voted when they turned 18. That was lower than what we expected, but still higher than the state average. So we're looking at what some of the barriers that they're experiencing. And some of that may be that there's a good portion of them that go out of state to college, so we don't necessarily have their voting records. She also looked at students who received training to work as student election judges, but didn't serve, and found that serving had a much more impactful experience than just going through the election judge training. And really, she recommended encouraging returning, because the more time election judges return to serve, the more likely they are to stay engaged. And so those are some of the major takeaways that we've had from the survey that we did, and thinking forward about areas of further study. We're happy to hear from you about things that you're interested in looking at this time around as well.
Fabulous. We did get a couple of questions in the chat, and thank you to the students who were online who had to leave. Really appreciate your sharing. One of the questions deals with how many student election judges you can have. Yeah. And it's not so much, my understanding, on a cap on students. It's needing adult election judges who are able to do the partisan balance work of if a voter has a question at the voting booth. One election judge doesn't go over. You need election judges from different parties to balance, to approach, ask that what the question is, and then help them out. If someone is doing curbside voting, same thing. You need two election judges from different parties to go and deliver that ballot and take it. So the number of students isn't a factor as long as you have what you need for adult election judges.
Yep, and I believe this, I'm going off of memory here, and I may not remember specifically, but I believe that no more than a third of the election judges in a polling place can be high school students.
And the other question that was posted, thank you, Karen, was how late can student election judges work? And we've got 10 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
Fabulous. And feel free to keep asking questions. We love it. And we're going to turn now to a section of the Center for Youth Voice website that deals with the student election judge network, that we call it, this system of trying to help jurisdictions with their recruitment and use of student election judges. And I'm going to switch my sharing to another page. Give me 1 second here. And what we have on that page is what we call the student election judge toolkit. And there it is. And this is an ever evolving collection of examples and samples. It isn't so much rules and regulations. It's you don't have to totally reinvent the wheel to do this, to have teenagers, 16 and 17-year-olds, bless you, be a part of your election judge system there in your jurisdiction. I'm not going to go through each one of these links and show you, because you can do that on your own. Everyone in their reminder email with the link today received towards the bottom a bookmark that was just put in as a picture. Those in the room have the opportunity to get a physical one, but it's a link to this page. So what do we have in here for categories and what's currently there, and what would we like you to help us continue to fortify on this page? So we begin with a couple of tips on working with schools themselves. Some of the question and discussion dealt with communication and partnership. You saw that slide from the survey about working with schools, having a formal or informal relationship versus working with student groups or letting students come to you. So one of the opportunities that exists is to have a formal planned relationship with administration, with faculty, with students at schools within your jurisdiction, and partnering with them, with community members and community groups. So there are a couple of links here with information about communicating, some samples for letters of introduction on the program, etc. Next, we have a sample timeline of 2024 student election judge recruitment and training activities. You'll see that it is a sample. Everything that we suggest here or make available is just for you to view, take in, and decide what works for you and what doesn't. It makes me think of the Council for the Advancement and Support of Education case. That's a higher ed group. And CASE also stands for, the members say, copy and steal everything. It's a great opportunity to get ideas, even if that idea leads you to, I would never do it that way. I would do it this way. Well, great. It is about what works for you, your jurisdiction, your election workers, and these students in schools. Next is the recruiting students section. And I'm actually going to reload because we may even have some updated links. So I think there are one or two that may not be active, but the rest are all updated and fine. And again, we're going to be continuing. But under recruiting students, you will see some sample social media posts, physical poster ideas, web page information. What is it that students need to know or want to know as you are coming up with them, coming up to them with this notion? You'll see the last link is something we recently added, which is from the state of Wyoming. Pretty much everything else you'll see is either an example from a Minnesota jurisdiction, or as we get down to the bottom, studies that were done nationally that back up why this program works and who it benefits. But I liked the Wyoming piece for two reasons. One, they used the state logo with, the cowboy riding a bronco. It's just kind of fun. But the other is that they take, I think, a different view on laying out what students can do. So it's an interesting example, but you will see social media, paper promotion, lots of different samples and advice there for recruiting students. Next, we've got a permission form. And as you develop your programs and your relationships or update information that you have, we ask that you share it with us, and we will share it with everyone else. Both the folks who are involved today, but also others who weren't able to get involved or who were just kind of too buried into the summer to read through all the emails. But we welcome, we appreciate any sharing that you would like to do on any piece or promotional item or strategic planning document that you would like shared. We would love to have it forwarded to us, and you'll get a follow-up email with that request as well. So a great Minneapolis permission form sample for you to take a look at. Next section is working with young people. It is true that teenagers are not 30, 50, 80 years old, like other election judges you may have a history of working with. Not only do they have different expectations and experiences, but they also have different talents and experiences to share. Technology being one, language acquisition and being able to help with language challenges is another. So the working with young people section has some suggestions that are general, some directed at head election judges and the work that they'll be doing. There's a great video done by students, that third link, tips for working with high school students. And then that last link is a section of the training guide from St. Louis Park, which gives their what's required of the trainings that adults do versus what's optional, depending on whether you're a student election judge and what area you're working in. So I thought that was interesting to add as well. The next section, why the program is good for the future, is some research that was done. Lots of great information there. There is a lot to both of those links, but you can focus in on what works for you. And as you can see highlighted, the high school students as election judges and campaign workers does the experience stick link is to a very long document. But the focus for us is chapter 19, which deals with students who have done student election judge work. How has that played out after they did it? So a lot on the benefits and the future outcomes for those who participate. Then there's some links for evaluation, because you may want to know from head election judges, from the schools, from the students themselves, and any teachers you work with. How did it go? What did students report? How was this for you? Is there a better way for us to go about things? And then from 2019, 5 case studies from 5 student election judge programs. We may be trying to update this as well, but the 5 experiences that are shared here are great. They are varied, and they will give you some insight as to different ways to run student election judge work and some of the experiences that may be helpful for you to know about. That is our toolkit as it stands today. And again, say this too many times, I'm sure, but we would love for you to share things from that you've done in the past or things that you develop going into the next election cycle and beyond. Love to share it with folks.
There's a question in the chat. First, any questions about toolkit that have come up as you were looking at that, or anything anyone would like to put forward or ask?
One of the questions in the chat while we're waiting to see if anybody else types in or raises a hand is, do the students have to be assigned to their home address ward, or can they be assigned to any ward? Actually, student election judges, as a part of the law, are able to serve as student election judges in any county that is either theirs or physically adjacent to their county. So if you are in a border county, it's just the counties that border yours, the Minnesota counties. If you are internal and you're surrounded by a bunch of other counties, it's all of those counties. So anywhere within the student's home county or any county that is physically adjacent to that county. How early can the students start at the polling place? I don't recall ever hearing of that's
There's
too
no,
early. Yeah, no early. And number of hours total.
there's no limit on that.
Yep, so
Number of
it's
hours.
just the 10 p.m. Cutoff. One person said, we struggle to get responses from some students by email, text, or phone call. Any tips?
Yeah, I think Charlie said it really well when it's just like bombard them. Just keep trying. If a student has reached out to you, they are interested. Sometimes ghosting is a problem, but very often students have a hard time answering some of the questions that come natural for adults because they have to rely on a parent for transportation, or they have to check about what their assignment is. And so they put off answering when they can't answer right away. So my suggestion is just keep communicating and use as many variety of ways of communicating as possible. Always try to get the parent contact information also, along with the student contact information, because that can be really helpful. And also, if you have a relationship with a teacher at their school, that's another really good way to connect with them.
I think we'll probably hear more of that from the different panelists that are coming up, the examples from the other election offices, but that is an ongoing question we've heard a lot about. And Robin's nodding her head. Robin and I work together. We live in the same county, and you know, the struggle is real, right? When it comes to that communication piece, and it's one of those barriers that is going to probably continue to be the hardest part of working with young people. But again, if we all kind of can see the win, it's worth sort of putting the effort in. But it is real, and it is really one of those real challenges. So hearing from others how they're doing it, what tools they're using, that's one of the things that came out of our election workshop 4 years ago, is what, you know, the ability to text students. That was a new thing for a lot of offices. We had worked by email. Most election offices had worked by email for a long time because 30, 50, and 60-year-olds get and respond to email and not text. And so, you know, how do we look at different ways of reaching out? So we'll hear more about that and talk more about that as the day goes on.
And one of the options that we have that that spreadsheets and databases help us with is asking, and this is for adults as well, but how would you like to be contacted? Give them the opportunity to say, I really don't check my email, you gotta text me. Or text is for personal, you know, this stuff is, I have 3 email addresses, so use this one. But let them tell you how they like to be contacted. That can be helpful as well. Any other questions on the toolkit or anything thus far before we take our break? This is the teacher pause. We will continue to take questions, so it's not a problem. Gonna add a minute to our break and come back at 11 promptly, please. So I've got 10:54. We'll take a 6-minute break and come back with a panel of election officials who will talk about their programs, some great examples and opportunities for you to ask questions there as well. See you in about 5-6 minutes. Thanks, everyone.
Please help yourself to
My poor husband,
Get unmuted.
every time we went
Welcome
anywhere.
back, everyone. Welcome back in the room and
Waitresses.
online.
Giving him a look, I'm like, no.
As
That's not him.
promised. I don't know what happened. It's reverted. Here we go. We're out of our break. And we have an election officials panel here. We're very excited about it. Amy Anderson, thank you for being our moderator for the panel. And here is our list.
So by moderator, he means that I'm really just going to introduce and thank again the people who are talking. This is actually, I think, the one of the richest parts of what we're here today to do is just to hear the stories of other offices. In my experience 4 years ago, this was the thing that generated the most thoughtful conversation and questions afterward, because you can hear from actual offices that are doing this in many different ways. What's really cool about this is we've tried to pull together a smattering of people who are running, you know, whether it's greater Minnesota or in the Twin Cities, and some of those challenges and some of the opportunities and some of the ways they've overcome them to create success. So with really, without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to the people that have the firsthand knowledge of this. We are very happy to have 4 or 5 different representatives to share with you, just 4 or 5 minutes each. Christian Cartwright is here from the city of Minneapolis. Cole Kleitch is from the organization Walking Civics, which is a group that helps to place veterans and young people together in polling places. Harold, I'm sorry, Langolowski.
I say Langowski.
From the city of Ely. Thank you for being here. Ely wants to be highlighted in the past too. Casey, also from the city of Ely, they'll be tag teaming, and then Karen Shield, who's going to talk about from the city of Minneapolis. Some of the things that they have been doing in their programs, again, to spark ideas, spark questions, talk about some of the good, bad, and the ugly. This is meant to sort of share all that because this is a work position. So, Christian, we're going to tee you up first, if it's okay. I'm sorry, or do you want me to start somewhere else?
No, it's totally fine.
Okay, great. We'll turn it over to Christian, and again, we'll let each place talk, and then we'll open up for questions afterward, if that's okay.
That's perfectly fine. Good morning, everyone. My name is Christian Cartwright. I work in the city of Rochester. I work partially in our elections division, although my bread and butter is licensing. So what the city of Rochester has found over the last couple of years is that engagement with a younger cohort of election judges has become pretty fundamental to the success of our elections. And a lot of that, and I think this could be replicated and found throughout the state, throughout the country, really got made apparent because of COVID, because of really losing a lot of our more seasoned, older election judges during that period of time. It identified the cracks in our system. And so as part of that, we began a pretty bold-faced pivot towards really recruiting and retaining younger judges. And one element of that is student election judges. So we have student election judge forms. We took a look to see kind of where our recruitment history for student election judges were, where we wanted it to be, and essentially how do we get there. And so one of the things that have become a lot more formalized, which was previously informal, is our relationship with our school district. So what we've done, and what we'll really see this year in particular, is we've partnered much closer with the school district, and we've really started actually taking over elections for school board related issues, in terms of in our capacity as the retainers of election judges and the retainers of polling places. And so what that's done is it's created a kind of tit for tat relationship, because in taking that over, what we've kind of asked, because it is a relationship and it is a partnership, is for the formal codification of schools in our system. So we have something like 20 to 25% of our polling locations are schools. And then as a result of that, we've also been working with our school district to make those days that are having elections, which are typically school days, so, you know, your PNP and your November elections closed, so that those schools are available to our regular election judges. Now, this has, as we found, become a double-edged sword for us, because we cannot then turn to our student election judges and say, hey, it's a day off school, because it already is. And so we kind of shot ourselves in the foot with recruiting there. But, you know, to answer a question that I think was brought up by you, Amber, earlier, and has been discussed and asked, you know, one of the things that we're trying to do, again, which COVID taught us in terms of recruiting election judges, is going to where they are, going to where they're at. If your cities have the capacity, because I'm very cognizant that not every city is the size of Rochester, Minneapolis, or St. Paul, but if your city has the capacity and the ability, going to the schools, making kind of, you know, as was mentioned earlier, a real sustained blitz of engaging student election judges, prospective student election judges, is what's going to start to move the needle. And realistically, you know, grabbing the lowest hanging fruit. So, and I'll stop pontificating and monopolizing this, but what we're doing is we're kind of tracking, like I said earlier, where we are and where we want to be. So in 2019, 2020, I would say less than 4%, less than 5% of our election judges were students. In 2022, in the general election, we were at 9%. My hope is that by 2028, we'll be somewhere around 1/5, 20%, but in an ideal world, if the stars align, maybe even a quarter of our election judges will be students. But to get there, we have to engage them, we have to retain them, and we have to sweeten the pot. So another part of it is obviously budgeting, figuring out what's a competitive wage, how do we attract them? And so that's all going into our longer term plan for how do we get student election judges to come, and more importantly, how do we get them to stay?
Thank you very, very much. And, you know, again, it's a moving target, right? In terms of, we've been seeing a lot more schools closing on election days, particularly recently around some of the security things. So I think, you know, it's strategies that worked 3 or 4 years ago might have to shift and pivot a little bit. So that's, again, we're kind of hearing how that's evolving and how those are changing and how that affects things. It's a good place for us to be able to share strategies for mitigating some of those challenges. I just want to add to that you mentioned the district relationships with the schools. One of the things that I think the Center for Youth Voice brings to this equation is a vast network of connections with schools, between running the student voting mock election statewide and then regularly recruiting for Youth in Government Model United Nations National Judicial Competition conference programs. We are in constant contact with schools, teachers, administrators, and working with them to sort of get in school. So if you would like an introduction to a school or a deeper relationship or a connection or an idea of where we're at and how we might be able to get that foot in the door or help to shore up that connection, please reach out. That's one of the things that we hope to be able to bring to you as a resource. Next, I think we'll go to Cole from Walk-in Civics. And tell us, Cole, if you could a little bit about your organization and sort of what you've seen in the experiences working with election offices.
Sure, you can hear me, I guess, correct?
Yep, we can.
Okay. My name is Cole Kleitch. I ran a program called Walking Civics, and generally what this was is my standpoint as a teacher for middle and high school students was contextualizing the service aspect of being an election official. And what I mean by that was I made sure, and I was lucky enough to do this in the city of Ely, and I have to include the township of Morris, which surrounds the city of Ely, and ask them, can we train high school students alongside military veterans? So we would bring people who knew about service to their country and had for decades done so, and these high school students together for a training, special training in the library, and they were trained side by side. So you had a 16-year-old sitting next to a 76-year-old Marine from Vietnam. They got to sit next to somebody who knows all about service. And sometimes that means doing a long day, all right? So they had some context to it. And just to ring the bell for today for 9/11, I would also raise with the students when I spoke to them, and I did have to go class to class to try and recruit this, was I pointed out, and this is a true fact, that on flight 93 on 9/11, the passengers just didn't choose to go fight. They actually voted on the plane, and that's in the records. So there was no low turnout on that plane. And I say to the students, not just to pitch being a poll worker and the work and the processes, is what I want to open with is we need you, okay? We're counting on you, and we're gonna give you that ability to be an election official. And again, I have to thank Harold Lankowski and Casey Velchek and Nick Wagnum, who was the election official for Morris Township around it, because they went above and beyond to help make sure that I got connected to the right people in the community. So this was a little harder than just kind of going to a classroom, as we had to get the VFW, we had to get these different pieces. And I had also some great help from the Minnesota Secretary of State's office as well, is we were able to bring these ingredients together. We have this wonderful photograph because after the training, we took this giant class picture, and you've got military veterans and high school students all in this library just after the training was done. It was great. But they also served together on election day. And so there are pictures of these young election officials sitting next to these military veterans. So they train together and they serve together. And I will admit that creates a logistical hurdle or two in those contexts, so that, it's kind of hard to do that. But like I said, I was fortunate that I picked the city of Ely and the township of Morse. Ely had the highest rate of volunteerism for any city during World War II, even while they were producing iron ore for the arsenal of democracy. So they have that history. So I got to lean into that. The last part I would say is to think about trying to provide some recognition to the students subsequent to their service, even if it's just training, because not all students who are trained may serve. We have to recognize that. But I think it'd be great if they could get something from the local jurisdiction that says you were trained as a poll worker. That goes on their high school transcript. And that can't be a bad thing, that a 16-year-old served as an election official for the state of Minnesota. And again, I was really fortunate because the place that I picked has unique components to it. And the election officials like Harold and Casey and Nick just went up, and the VFW and the school went above and beyond to make that connection. So that was my magic trick. I had all the right ingredients in the right place and in the right state too. Minnesota's always out in the front of civic engagement. So that was a bright star on that one too.
Paul, thank you for sharing that story. Is that something that you would be willing to be a resource for others if they had questions about how to get started in their own community? Or do you see the expandability of that idea, being fairly easily transferable?
Absolutely. Again, for me, it's for a high school student, you've got to tell the story. And the veterans brought that piece is to impress upon them that, and I will be happy to do that, is that, to just don't convince them, tell them the truth. We need you. We're actually counting on you. We're investing in you a power of an election official because at 16, we think you can do it, or 17 or whatever age they are. So yes, I'd be happy to be a resource in any way I can.
Thank you very much. Asking out loud before we move on, is Ely on the call? We've been having trouble seeing your names on the Harold. Yeah, Harold, Casey, or Nick. Anyone from Ely?
I don't think Nick was on the list, but he was one of the key players, not least of which because he runs the local newspapers, so we definitely got great coverage.
Cole, we were just seeing if they're actually logged in. Some of the Zoom names are clerk, city of, and that's all it says. So we're seeing if Harold or Casey got on.
Well, it's up in the northern tier, so internet's spotty, but I can guarantee you the city has great internet coverage. If you're out on the lake, that's another story.
We'll give them a few minutes, and I'm gonna pass it over to Karen just to talk a little bit what happened in Minneapolis. And then we'll open it up for some questions, and maybe Casey and Howard could join us later on, or otherwise we'll be sure and connect them up and get them resources as well. So Karen, you want to share a little bit about what's happening in Minneapolis?
Sure. Minneapolis has had a fairly robust student election judge program for about 30 years. Mary Davids, my predecessor in this role, really was a groundbreaker in getting it up and running. And I've continued the work and continued a lot of the relationships with the schools. We have somewhere between 250 and 400 high school students working for election in the city of Minneapolis. And it kind of goes up and down. We've seen a number of changes since the pandemic. 2020 was a really strong year where students were very engaged and very interested. The network kind of helped me work with a lot of other elections officials in connecting young people to opportunities, because we had many students were drawn to us because we had an online application at the time and they lived in other jurisdictions. So we were able to help connect them to their local elections office when that was more appropriate. But we've continued to grow the program. We have relationships with about 16 schools in the city of Minneapolis. And we get students from about 60 different high schools regionally. One of the things that we implemented, and you heard a little bit from the students earlier, is that we rely a lot on the students as much as the teachers to do a lot of our recruitment for us. We have the students from Washburn who are on this morning. They serve as elections ambassadors with our office, where they're really kind of a resource that we go to when we have a need for speakers, when we are looking at, okay, how can we help recruit students this year? They're some of the students that we go to. We have students in about 4 or 5 different high schools who fulfill that role for us. And that's been really helpful. We work pretty closely with the Y on a lot of youth civic engagement programs. And one thing that we're finding is that all the changes in civic education in Minnesota, as the state is really thinking about how to do that, I think there's a nice role for elections offices to step in with not only offering the opportunity to serve as a student election judge, but really to help with student pre-registration, to really talk about voter registration and think about what are some of the other ways you can connect your city offices with the school. You know, most of the clerks in Minnesota really cover a broad range of civic functions in their office. So really thinking and helping the school teach about local government is kind of a natural way to get the foot in the door. And we're starting to do that in Minneapolis too. We're looking at other kinds of add-ons that we can bring. We took a page from Ramsey County Elections, which instituted an interpreter training for their election judges last year. And we are adapting that to teach high school students who speak Somali how to provide better language support in the polling place. That's been kind of a pain point for us. And we have one high school that has supplied 75% of our Somali speaking judges, you know, whether they're still high school students or whether they've aged out of being student election judges and continue to be judges. So this is an area where we think we can help provide the vocabulary support, kind of more the philosophy of what that language support looks like in the polling place. So that's one of the new things that we're doing. That's Ridwan, who had to leave, is helping us with that. She's working in our office on that project.
Thank you for that. I'm intrigued to learn more, and I would guess some of you this ambassador program, the student ambassador program. I think that's a really rich opportunity to, you know, to do a little bit of training and then send the info. We find that in our own recruiting as well with our civic education programs like Youth in Government. And having the student invite the student to participate is going to win 9 times out of 9 versus, you know, having the adult come in and say, you should do this cool government education thing. So, so maybe we can hear more about that or post some information about that, you know, after this is over as well. Absolutely. Did we ever hear from anyone from Ely?
I heard that Casey is trying to get in. So There
I just
may be a-
spoke to her. She's gonna give it a shot.
Okay.
Great.
Do we want to open it up? Is there anything that after hearing from Christian and Cole and Karen, does anyone have any questions either here in the room or online that you'd like to pose to any of these folks about the stuff they're doing? Yeah, Cole.
Does any of the other jurisdictions provide some sort of a document, a certificate, or some sort of, good job, attaboy, attagirl kind of a thing, looks official, maybe with a gold seal, whatever it is, for a sophomore, junior, or senior in high school, having that recognition is you served your community, you served your country, whether that, and again, we have to do it for everybody who gets training, because even if you don't want to leave the students out that maybe don't get assigned a place, does anybody do that? Does anybody do some follow-up to say, here, this is something this student did, so it can go on their transcript? Does anybody do that? Because I didn't. I just didn't think about it till later.
We don't send out certificates for it, but what we do is we follow up with the schools where the students work. Or not where they work, but where they study. And we let their principal know, hey, this is the list of students from your school who did this, and so that gives them something that they can use in their communications about opportunities that they supply to the students, and we copy the students in on that as well. There was one other thing we do, but I've lost my train of thought there.
We do not, but that's actually a point, as I listen to both of you, that I think we are probably going to implement. Use an online software called Modus, which would make creating such a standardized seal pretty easy to do. So it's actually a really great idea, and I tip my hat off to you for bringing it up.
That is what this day is about, right?
Yes,
That's what this day is about. Anybody else online do anything like that, or have you implemented anything like that type of a recognition post-training?
Feel free to just unmute.
In St. Louis Park, we do use Modus's certificate. You just email them out. I mean, that's not really, everyone gets that, but we do have a Youth in the Cities program as well, which it's not, half of it's about elections and government, but the other ones we invite like the fire, police, parks and rec, just to get them to know like the jobs that are in the city. And they get a mayor signed certificate. I don't know if you put it on a resume, but it's fun to have.
Michael?
Yes, Cole.
I want to point out to everybody, I don't think he can do this for everybody, or she, when the time comes. But Michael arranged to have the Secretary of State do about a 30-second, 40-second message, especially for the students and the veterans who are being trained. And then we played that at the beginning of training. And I can tell you, everybody sat up a little straighter because they got to hear from your state's top election official about what they were doing there and how important and vital it was. And again, that helps provide that context for the students to realize they're actually doing something really important. It may not seem like it, but as much juice as we can put into that, like I said, it made a big difference.
Thank you for that, Cole. I'll say
Thank
that
you.
I wouldn't be surprised if Secretary Simon would step up to do that for anybody.
That's a great video. You should show it sometime. It's really, really good. It's right at the camera. The kids and the veterans just sat there and soaked it up, and then they were ready to go.
There was a question.
Yeah.
If anybody has had chat, the last question that came up. I had to restart here.
Yeah, so one of the questions that came up in chat was, in what capacity can student judges work early voting, and have any cities used them for early voting?
Good question.
Yeah, we've used high school students for early voting in the summer for the primary election. So they get trained alongside our other early voting staff and work in our early voting sites, mostly during the summer. During the school year, it is a little bit more challenging to try to figure out schedules for them that would work for us as well. But we hope to continue using them for the primary elections and early voting.
So another question come up, is the video from Secretary Simon available? I haven't talked to Secretary Simon, but I am quite certain it is. This is one of the things he likes to do absolutely the best. You know, we might even be able to get him available in some cases in person, but for sure, I am quite certain that he would even customize a video for your trainings.
Huge difference, huge lift.
We will definitely reach out about that and a general recorded message.
Yes, go ahead.
So while I'm doing this training, I'm thinking about PSEO students. Has anyone tapped into those, that group of people? Seeing if there could be like college ties in.
We have several of our student election judges are PSEO students. And what we've found is that sometimes it's a little more challenging for them to get out of class because they have to get out from their professors. You know, so we find that the PSEO students that we have tend to work, we offer a half-day shift, a half day for 8 hours. And so they're more likely to choose those shifts.
But still a good source of, you know, again, thinking, you know, we do this too at the Y, that we tend to sort of gravitate to social, you know, advanced social studies classes. Let's recruit from the advanced social studies classes. And in many cases, those are the kids that are tapped out on activities and time and a lot of other things. So thinking more broadly about where students who have passionate or who have interest in, you know, current events and or making money, you know, on the more base level, how do I reach out to those? So PSEO is a great option for that. Some of the cultural liaison in schools can be a nice resource for ways to getting people engaged. So, you know, again, kind of going at it from different. National Honor Society, you know, there's just all kinds of different is great. Student councils are another, and just different draws of different kids. So how do you tap into where the kids are, and happy to help with that if we can be helpful.
My own question, do we know, or is there conversation / a formal relationship with, say, U of M, Hamlin, some of the state schools in terms of any form of recognition of election judge certificates, again to Cole's point, or other such things which, you know, are beneficial to their transcript, particularly for those students that want to do poli-sci, sociology, et cetera, kind of as another pathway to sweetening the pot for recruitment?
To my knowledge, I don't think there's any formal kinds of ways beyond what's on their resume application for college and that kind of thing. It's in the other activities, and I certainly think that it raises it up. But it's an interesting point. If we could, you know, continue to escalate that higher or elevate that, all good. It's certainly something we could look into.
Yeah. And that reminds me of one of the other things that I do to sweeten the pot, so to speak, for the high school students. And we're entering into a period where this is more possible right now with 4 elections right in a row. We allow our high school students to move up into leadership positions within the polling place. So we have poll book and registration specialists who are the leaders of the poll book and registration table at our polling places. They do the tech support and really get extra training in some of the trickier registration processes. So students with experience who get good reviews and evaluations and recommendations from their head judges can move into those roles. And once they turn 18, if they've served as a poll book and registration specialist, they're also eligible to move up to the assistant head position once they turn 18. Right now, we have, I think, 7 head judges who were student election judges in 2016 and 2018 when I first started. So they've stuck with it and really stepped up into those roles.
Yeah, Nicole.
I just wanted to say thank you. I'm gonna have to go run off and teach some sixth graders science, believe it or not. But I want to thank the Secretary of State's office, Amy and Michael, for including me. And again, to be one of the states that's being a leader in this, because this is going to be the future. And down the road, we'll have thousands of kids serving nationwide, and it'll be nothing but good. So again, thanks for your time. I'm going to run off, and you all have a good day.
Thanks, Cole.
Take care.
Does anyone have any last questions? We're at time for, yeah.
What else do you do throughout the year? I mean, granted, we know elections keeps us busy all year round. How do you keep your kids involved throughout the whole year? I mean, what do you add other things to the for them to do?
It's a fabulous question, may I?
Yes.
And generally, and I'm talking from the WISE perspective, and also I worked voter outreach with youth at the Secretary of State's office, and we work with different jurisdictions, including Minneapolis. So Karen, I definitely want to hear from you. But in talking with groups who focus on an individual thing, and I'll take voter registration as one example, they just want to come in, register kids to vote, and then leave. And schools don't want that. They feel used, put upon, it's not our schedule, it's yours coming in doing this. The best thing to do, if you ask me, is to establish a relationship where you offer to provide what the school needs. Schools, for the most part, want their kids to be civically educated and engaged. It's just they don't want people to come in and piecemeal do things that work for them. So offering to be a resource is one, year-round. If there are any teachers, usually social studies teachers, but any teachers, classes, programs who need someone to come in and talk about voting, elections, having a voice.
Registration.
Right, registration for voting, pre-registration now, any of that, but also depending on your connection with community groups, connection to history. There are lots of things, but have the relationship be year-round. So when you say, here is an opportunity to be a student election judge, it's not the city needs to get election judges. It's we have this ongoing relationship. We're talking about civic engagement and education, and here is an opportunity. So that year-round relationship is mine.
Do either of your offices do something like that, or anybody else on the call or in the room have a more, St. Louis Park had one for a while. Do you still do a more ongoing engagement strategy? Sometimes there was a monthly cohort meeting, or
Yeah.
let's hear from you and hear what people are doing, if anything.
Yeah, St. Louis Park had an active youth and elections kind of once a month meeting.
Pre-pandemic.
Yeah, it was pre-pandemic.
Yeah.
The last thing we offered was to go into the high schools, and we went to actually the clubs. So it was the activist club and then the youth and government, and we had them come together. And we were gonna have them propose something to the council. So it wasn't really about being an election judge, but it was about like how to learn how to come forth to your council. Ultimately, it was like the end of the year and they were just so busy, but just having a connection now, I know like 5 or 6 kids there that are really like leaderships positions in the clubs. So that's nice. And they still reach out to me asking what's going on. So.
Anyone else have ideas or things you've tried, or?
Ours isn't quite as year round, but one of the things that we are doing is not coming because so we don't just come when we need them, you know, like 3 weeks before the election. We kind of are attempting to plant the seed and then germinate it over time. So we will go in, have the conversation. I do like the idea of coming into schools and classrooms and building up teachers. We'll go in and we'll talk to them ahead of time, months ahead of time to kind of get the general idea of, the civic mindedness and to talk to different schools. And then we will come back closer to the election because you do find that there's a drop off, there's a lack of interest, particularly if the forms aren't available. But it's basically to say, this is the thing that we do. This is the benefit for it. And then when we come back, we kind of build off of that block there and say, we were here 6 months ago, we're here 8 months ago. This is formalized, which is kind of letting you know. But again, as we get more and more into it, as we really build these relationships, I'm kind of writing notes as I kind of take from all of you, because there's some really fantastic ideas that we want to replicate.
That's exactly what we're hoping, Chris,
Yeah.
is that people are saying, oh, that's something that we do. Yes, definitely.
And I would say another way to stay engaged with the young people, I started the ambassadors program because of the same thing that you just mentioned, Denise, was after the election, I'd get kids who call me up or email me and they'd say, hey, that was really cool. What's next? What's next? What can I do now? And I hated saying, well, the next election is in November 2024, and we'll talk to you then. And so I'd say, well, we're always looking for elections ambassadors. And so why don't you come in and we'll talk and we'll come up with a project that you could do. I started doing this on a somewhat individualized basis when kids were really motivated. And then I decided that I would put out a call after the election to say, hey, if you want to sign up to be an elections ambassador, here's an application that you can fill out. And then we get together. It ended up being more online than in person, but kind of talk about it, talk about our needs, talk about what they're interested, what skills they want to develop. I have a little bit more time to do that than some offices do, but I think that's a good way to keep young people to connected, to hear about them, to get their feedback on your programming and the structure of your program. You can use it as a focus group to find out what was hard for the students, what did they not understand when they first got there, how could we address some of this in training, and just having a group of young people to serve as like this civic feedback is a fairly easy way to get started.
And I would just put a plug in that many of us, myself included, for a lot of years felt if I was gathering a group of young people, I had to sort of be in control of that group, or I had to be leading that group. And it's what I've come to understand, and what I fully believe now, is that if you have a couple of really committed or ones who have been engaged before, turn over some of that power, that youth adult partnership, and let them lead with guidance from you on the side. It doesn't feel quite so overwhelming, and giving them the chance to be leaders gives them good practice of that. And so, not feeling like, oh, this is another thing I've got to take on and manage and run. This is a chance for you to grow that next generation of leaders with some guidance from the side, and let them really take the group, as the group wants to go. And you might be amazed at what comes out of it.
Do you pay your ambassadors?
Right now, they're just volunteer.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. We're exploring ways to pay them, but it's been a little bit challenging with how our city functions.
Sure. So really
Gift cards work wonder with young people. I'm not gonna lie. My experience is a $25 gift card, or or $15 gift
They
card
can't
at
do that.
Target or
Local
Starbucks.
government can't do that.
No.
The what?
Local governments can't
Local
use
can't,
gift
oh,
cards
that's
for
right.
compensation.
But can the local government, I have no idea,
Sure.
partner with the
Alliance.
Lions, the Rotary, whoever, and ask them to sponsor a program like that where they would
Don't
give,
know.
yeah.
Don't want to step in. We're not trying to step into legal
No.
zone here.
Yeah,
That's
no,
not right.
yes.
it's a great area if it was a partnership program and they were, providing some of the sources, maybe that's the extra class or something like that. But if we're talking about we're hiring them under a job description that has a pay range, we need to be paying them that range, not providing compensation in other forms.
And there's good reason for that. We all know that.
The Office of the State Auditor certainly feels that way. It would be nice to have additional flexibility for all types of civic engagement programs to be able to have gift cards as
Thank
That will
you
be
for
our
next
participation.
workshop. We'll work on that.
Yeah, you guys
next
work
time.
on the state auditor, we'll support you.
You can buy lunch for them though.
Yeah.
So just a heads.
And sometimes that pizza lunches or whatever it is a great incentive. Food is one of the best incentives I found as well, so. Yeah. Okay, I want to be sure we have time to really spend time talking with each other. That's one of the core things we wanted to do today. So I'm gonna call the panel complete at this point, although again, we're so grateful for those who are willing to share their stories. And if there's follow-up questions, we encourage you to reach out to either people who spoke or otherwise. Now we'd like to turn it over to the last couple elements and let's break out the next group.
Yeah, last element actually is the opportunity for folks to get together and talk. Online, we're going to break you into groups of 6, and it's your opportunity to do a quick introduction, but to talk about a couple of things. Let me seed those conversations. You talk about whatever you want, but have you done it before? What are you looking for? What could help you? And by the way, these requests, also send them to us. That's why we're here, to help with that. But within these small networking groups, what is it that you could use? What is it that you have that worked well? What didn't work well if you've tried this before that you either would like other people's experience for, or to just wave people away? Don't do this. So share your experience, but also what you're looking for. Because while the other 5 in the group may not have it, they may be networking with someone else and they can connect that person to you. So talk about what your needs are, and we'll do the same thing in the room. I think we're maybe small enough to do it as a group, but Ted, are we good to go?
I think so.
Fabulous. So we're gonna pop you into groups online, and when you are done, we are done. We're not gonna bring you back, but we'll reach out to everybody by email, and we so appreciate you being here, part of this event. Thank you.